Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Today, I want to take a look at some problems that we see coming up over and over again with questions on the forum or through social media. And I'm going to look at six of my favorite. They tend to be a little bit more difficult to solve. First, just a little bit about me. My name's Jim Dehner. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm one of the Tableau Visionaries. I'm also an ambassador. Everything I'm showing you today is already out on my blog, and you can just download it at jimdehner.com. Let's take a look at the first of those problems, and that's known as the top end and other problem. User will come with a question. I've got a data set. I want to look at individually the top three or four items, and then every other item I want grouped into a category called other. Well, let's take a look at how we'd go about doing that. And I'm going to show you two different ways. The first way, and this is the easier of the two ways, and I suggest if this works for you, by all means use it. I'm going to go and I'm going to create a set based on, we're just going to edit the set there. All I'm going to do is create a set, and that set is going to be based on this parameter that we have here, the N for the top end based on sales. And all I'm going to do with that set is, let's take a look at the parameter real quick. This is just an integer parameter, and it'll take any value. And right now I've got it set at 3. And I'm going to create a calculation based on that parameter. And all this does is, if the subcategory is in the set, we've got in the set and out of the set. If the subcategory is in the set, then return the subcategory name, otherwise call it other. And I've added that to my chart here, and you can see these are we've got these subcategories here for the top three, and we've got other there, but these aren't in an order or a sequence that we'd like to see that. But we can change that. We can just drop the ins and the outs on the chart. And now we've got our top three, and then we've got all of the other in one category. But what we'd like to see is we just like to see the totals, and we can do that just by removing the subcategory. And now we've got the top three individually, and then we've got other, and we've got the totals and the subtotals. And sure enough, we can change this using the parameter that we put in here before. Now we're going to see the top four and other. If that works for you, by all means use it. It's the easy way of solving this problem. Now, we have other users that come and they say, hey, wait a minute, that's fine, but that's not really what I wanted. I've got data by year, for example. And what I want to see is I want to see the top N in each year and other in each year. And when we do that, the first thing we need to do is we need to recognize that our top three, for example, in 2025 might be phones, chairs, and binders. But in other years, they're different values. Here in 2024, the top three are chairs, phones, and I think it's tables. So we're going to have category differences year over year. And I'm going to show you how we can solve that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an LOD. And part of that is because I like using LODs, but also I want each subcategory by each year, I want the total sales. Okay, so now I can look at each year separately and each subcategory separately. And then we're going to come back and we're going to rank those values. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to rank that LOD descending. So now I've got the rank, and rank is a table calculation. We use table calculations to look across records, and we have to look across each one of those subcategories individually to determine its rank. And then I want to take that ranking and I want to break this ranking into two groups. I want if the ranking is less than our parameter value that we used before to calculate N, return a true. If not, return a false. So now we can break these into two different groups, and we can start doing some totals along the way. What the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag rank, and I'm going to put it up here on the rows so that we can see what's happening here. And in 2025, we've got these three values that are going to be the total. And 2024, we're going to have chairs, and we're going to have phones, and we're going to have tables, and so on and so forth. And what we want to do is we want to calculate the total of the three values by year, and then have one total for this category called other. Now, it gets a little complicated on what we have to do here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to calculate the total for the 3 years that are in the group here. And I'm just going to use window sum. Window sum is another table calculation. And all this says is, look, if that true false statement we created returns a true, then add the total sales, and we're going to sum those for each year. So this formula is going to give us the sum of these three and that three and that three. Now what we've got to do is we've got to take the remainder of the difference between the total for the entire year and the total of the window sum to get the other total. And this is a very straightforward if-then calculation. All it says is, look, if the value is in the true-false statement, then return the sales, return that value there. If not, take the total for the year, this is the fixed total for the year, minus that window calculation we just calculated, the sum of these values, and return that value. And we can do that. And when we do that, we get something that looks like this. Okay, I've got the individual items, and then I've got in other, I've got the difference between this total value and the window sum of those. And now all we need to do is we only want to see one of these values. We don't want to see them all. And we're going to do that with a show hide filter. And show hide filters are examples of a table calculation filter. And we're going to talk about the order of operation later, but they're last in the order of operation, and it's what we need to use here. And all this says is if the last value in our chart is designated 0, and I want to see that value, so I use show. And if it's anything else, any one of these values, then I want to see those values, and all the other values I want to hide. And all we're going to do is we're going to drop that on our chart. We're going to use our show hide filter. This is what our chart looked like. And now we're going to use our show hide filter, and we're only going to see the values that are totaled for the individual categories by year and the other total. Now, I did one other thing that I want to show you here real quickly. And that's something I did here with the label. And all I did was I applied this label, and all this says is if the subcategory is in the set of 3, put a blank in and then the subcategory name, otherwise call it other. And the reason I did that is if you look here, you can see that this is offset by just this one blank, and that will assure that other is always at the bottom of our list. That's how you do top end and other. Now, the second problem I want to look at comes up with users who contact us and they say, hey, look, I want to see a chart, and I want to be able to change between day, week, month, year, and so on. And there's a couple of ways of doing this. I'm going to show you 2 ways here. And once again, I'm going to show you the easy way first. And if this works for you, use it. All I have done here is I have taken our date and I placed it on columns. I'm using the exact date, and I'm using it as a continuous date. Okay, so we've got the exact date and we've got a continuous. And I'm going to filter that date. And when we filter that date, I have options on what I'd like that filter to look like. It could be a relative date, a range of date, but we're going to choose this one, browse periods. You may not be familiar with this. And what browse period does is it looks at the date of today, the last, our current date, and then it looks back by this period. So if I'm looking here 1 month backward, I'm looking at the difference between today's date and 1 month earlier, and I see all those values. We can set this to week. If we're looking at a day, we're only going to see a data point. If we're looking at 3 months, we'll see 3 months, and so on. If this works for you, by all means use it. It's easy. Now, this other method is not very difficult also. All we do is we create a parameter, and this parameter, uh, the only thing important about this parameter is the value here. The value is what we're going to use in a calculation. We're going to use this in a date calculation, a date function. So we need this value to be in the syntax that's appropriate within that date calculation. And the levels in the date function are single valued. It's day, not days. They're lowercase. Now, the display value can be anything. You could call this, for example, if you wanted to call this dates, that's fine. And if you wanted to call this, you wanted to call this month and use an abbreviation like that, that's fine. The only thing that matters is the value that's being passed to the calculation. So you can see I got dates here and I got MN there for month and I got years. All we're going to do is we're going to use this parameter driven date. It's just very simply, and it says, okay, I'm going to use a date trunk, and this returns the first date of the period that we're looking at. And the period is defined by the parameter value on the order date. And that's what we're going to look at here. So now when we're set at year, this is set to years. We can look at months. We can look at weeks. And we can look at days if you wanted to. It gets kind of crazy when you look at days, but I'm just going to set this back to months. So we can look at any date level that we want. Now I could hear somebody saying, well, that's fine, Jim. This is a continuous date. I want to see a discrete date. We can do it with a discrete date also. All we do is we take our date value, we leave it at exact date, and we change it from continuous to discrete. And now we have a discrete axis here. I put category here on the axis. It doesn't have to be on the axis. We could pull it off the axis and we could look at a stack bar chart, for example. And just like we did before, we can change between weeks, months, and years. And it's no more difficult than that to vary the date based on a parameter value. Now, for the third thing I want to look at, this is a question that comes up very frequently, and this is one of the more difficult questions. It usually comes from some of our users who have a background in Excel, and I have that background myself. If you're familiar with Excel chart types, they have a chart type called combo or combination chart, where you can take line charts and bar charts and we can mix them on the same chart. We don't have that option in Tableau, so we have to make one for ourselves. Now, I want to take a look at a data set, and I'm going to show you the data set here. It looks like this. This is just a data set that I made up. I've got 5 values in the data set. 3 of them, sales, quantity, and the number of customers, I want to see in a bar chart. And then I've got the average customer purchase, and I've got the average selling price. And those I want to see as part of a line chart. And we can take a look at that data set as a stacked bar. And if we look at it as a stacked bar chart, one approach, if we're only going to look at one of our line values, we can plot in a dual axis, and I'm going to separate the axes here. We can plot in a dual axis our bars and our lines separately. And for our bars, I've chosen measure names and measure values, and we just put in a filter on measure names, and I selected the bars that I want to see, sales, quantity, and number of customers are in our bar chart. And I've only got an option to put one of our averages there. And when I use dual axis, I can get a chart that looks like this. But it didn't meet what we wanted to do. What we wanted to do is we wanted to look at a side-by-side chart, and we wanted to see both lines on there. And when we do that, we get a chart that looks like this. And users will come back and say, well, wait a minute, I'm not able to connect the lines together, the dots on the lines. What do I do? And our problem here is that each position on this horizontal axis is discrete, and we need to be able to address that individually. Well, I'm going to show you how we can address that. First, we're going to go back to that data set. And what I need is each one of these values associated with each date individually, and I can do that by pivoting the data. And we're just going to pivot the data. Now, The data's pivoted. So for each one of the values here, for the, like for the 1st of January, I've got each one of my 5 values. And once again, I want the sales quantity and number of customers to be on a bar graph, and I want these other two averages to be on a line graph. We can come back and we can start building that solution out. And it's going to end up looking like this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the bars from the lines. Now, someone out there will say, hey, wait a minute, you just went to all this trouble to put them together. Now you're taking them apart. Yes, I am. I need to have the bars separated from the lines. And if you remember, I just left this as pivot field names. You can change that to anything. But if the pivot field names are in either ASP or average customer purchase, I want to see them as lines. Anything else I want to see as bars. Because we're going to make a dual axis chart. Okay? And I'm going to break those two apart. There's my dual axis chart. And I've got bar values and I've got line values. Once we know what are bars and what are lines, we can just do a simple, if they're bars, I want to see the values of the pivot values as bars. And if they are lines, I want to see a separate measure now, separating out the lines and the values for those. And I can plot those on my individual axis. But I still need a place on this chart horizontally for each one of the bars and for each one of the lines. Well, to do that, I started by creating a parameter, and this is nothing more than a parameter, an integer parameter, that's going to give me some flexibility in the formatting. It's going to allow me to move these bars and lines over a little bit. And I'm going to use, first of all, I'm going to use an index to create this axis. And this is going to return a date field. I'm going to use the date function dateAdd, and I'm going to add a number of days. And the number of days I'm going to add are equal to the index times this multiplier. That's that spacing again. And the other value is the date itself. And that's just going to allow me to find different positions on that chart. And it's a table calculation. It just looks like this. And we're going to change that index every time the pivot field name changes. And that's all we're doing here. We now make this a dual axis. And right away you say, hey, Jim, you broke the chart. We wanted to see lines. Well, what's happened is this measured names got put up there. And if we remove that, now we've got the chart the way that we want it. Is the chart exact? No, it's not exact. But visually, it represents what you would like to see and what your user would like to see. Now, I'm going to show you one additional way of doing this. Okay, instead of using index, I want to use a calculation that's more exact and puts them in a more defined location. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at those pivot names. And if the name is sales, I want it at the initial starting point of that date on the axis. If it's quantity, I want to move it 5 days over. Totally arbitrary. I chose 5 days. If it's number of customers, I'll move it 10 days over. And those are the bars. And then for the lines, I want the lines in between those dates. I want the point for the lines in between those dates. And if it's average selling price, it moves 3 days over. And if it's average customer purchase, it's 8 days over. And that will return the chart that you see here. It's a little bit difficult to do that, but now you know how it's done. And if you get the opportunity, use it in your next chart. Sometimes we get users who want to use a waterfall chart. Waterfall chart is a cool chart to show progression from a starting period to the end period and how a measure has progressed. And if you look at it, you can say, well, that can be kind of a difficult chart to create, but actually it's quite easy. We're going to use the profit here, and I'm taking the sum of profit, and I'm going to start by, I've added a color code here, and all this does is it says, look, if the sum of the profit is greater than 0, return a true, otherwise return a false. So I get true values and false values. And I'm beginning to get a sense of positives and negatives here. And I'm going to take this chart and I'm going to create a table calculation, and I'm going to get the running total. Now we've got a sense of movement in this chart, and we can see how the total profit over time has progressed. But we don't want to see a chart that looks like that. We want to see a waterfall chart. And here's where the trick, if you will, comes in. I'm going to use, for the size, and I'm going to place this on size, I'm going to call it the bar size. It's equal to the negative value of the absolute profit, not the running value of the profit, but the absolute value of the profit. I'm just going to take and I'm going to put that on size. And you say, well, okay, I see it's done something, but that still hasn't given us the chart that we're looking at. Well, we're going to change this chart type to a Gantt chart, and we're done. Now we get the waterfall chart that we want. And some people will say, well, I'd like to see some subtotals on that chart. And we can put subtotals on that chart, or we can put totals on that chart. But that's how you create a waterfall chart. It's no more difficult than that. Okay. We get questions on a repeated basis from users who want to take a dimension and use it in a filter. And at the same time, they want to use that same dimension unfiltered. And they want to see both of those values on a chart. And they say, how can I filter a dimension and not filter a dimension and see them both simultaneously? Well, this is a straightforward application of the order of operation. And this is the image that I use when I look at the order of operation. I use this 10-step sequence, and I know other people use other images. This one works best for me. And I break it down into 3 groups. And the 3 groups, the first 2 steps in the order of operation operate at the workbook level. Everything else is at the worksheet level. And we're going to concentrate, at least here for this example, right here in steps 3, 4, and 5. And we're going to use fixed LODs to calculate one of our values. And if we apply a filter in context, it is applied in step 3 before the LOD is calculated. If instead we apply the filter as a dimension filter, a blue filter, if you will, it's applied after the LOD is calculated, and the filter doesn't affect the LOD. And all we're doing at this point is we're taking this fixed calculation. This is just a very straightforward calculation. All it says is, fixed category sum of sales, just for our example here. That's all we're doing. And this is our fixed category sum of sales, and this is the sales, and I've applied a filter on region. And it's a blue filter, so it's applied as a measure filter after the LOD is calculated. And you can see here, if I have no filters applied, these values are the same. But if I'm filtering out, my LOD does not change, but my sales value does change. So I'm able to see the value with the filter applied and without the filter applied. And we can just, okay. Okay. And we can simply look at those values on our bar chart. And if we look at all of them at once, we can see that the values are the same. And our bars are filtered. They are the sales value versus our vertical bar there, which is our fixed sales value. And all I've done to create this vertical line is that second value is plotted as a Gantt chart again. I've got one more example I want to share with you. And that's the use of a show hide filter, if you will, to filter a table calculation. And you may have seen this before. I've got 2 examples here to show you. One is the relatively straightforward, easy example. I'm just going to take a look here at sales. And I've got sales and I've got the running sales. This is just a table calculation. It's just the running sales. And all this is this value is the sum of those 2 values, and that value is the sum of the 3 values, and so on. And if we were to plot that running total on a chart, it would look something like this. And we can see here, it starts down here. in at 14,000, and it goes to a total of $2.3 million. And our user is going to come in and they're going to say, hey, look, all I want to see is I want to see the last 12 values on the chart. I just want to see values that look like this. And if I look at those values and I apply a filter and I just keep those values, for example, I apply a filter, I'm not starting at zero. I'm not getting to 2.3. What's going on and how can I deal with this? Well, I want to go back just real quick and take a look at the order of operations. The table calculation, the running total, is calculated down here in step 10 of the order of operation. All of the filters have been applied prior to that, or at least 5 of the 6 types of filters have been applied before that, including our context filters and our dimension filters. So any filter applied in context or dimension or a measure filter is going to affect that table calculation. But we can apply a filter based on another table calculation. And I'm going to add that filter, and I'm going to use and you've probably seen this done before. I'm going to use a last filter, and all this says is if the value of last, which is a table calculation in itself, and it calculates from 0 and calculates upward. It increases going back to the left. If it's less than 12, then show. If it's otherwise, hide. And I use show and hide. Some people use true and false. I'm very forgetful, and if I look at this 6 months from now, I want to remember what I did. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to apply that as a show filter. And now we see those values. We see the value that starts 12 months ago, and now we get our $2.3 million. It's kind of like, I'm going to show the filter here. It's kind of like taking a window and moving it along your chart here and just looking at this portion of the chart. Okay, and we can use our show hide filter that way. Now, a second example that we'll get questions about is, that's fine, but I don't want to see the last values. I want to be able to decide using a filter the values that I want to see along my axis. And that is done with another table calculation. We create this calculation, which is a lookup function. All this does is it looks up at the current value, and I use lookup min order date. Please do not use ATTR unless you have to. Look up the min order date of the current value and place it on the chart here, and then we're going to filter by that same value, and you'll notice that I have to have the actual order date in the chart, and it's just in there as detail. And once you've done that, that filter will move that window that we're looking through anywhere you choose along the chart, and we can see our start dates and our end dates based on that filter. That's what I wanted to share with you this morning. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Bye now.